it was looking kind of bleak after a look. It's not been a great last couple of weeks for the Royals, and this was a series that is tailor-made to get them back on track. You're hosting the Marlins, an awful team, and sure enough, they were facing the same kind of fate that, lo and behold, the Cardinals faced just last week, losing a series to the Marlins. Now, the Cardinals obviously bounced back from that, but the way that the Royals have been trending over the last couple of weeks, they've obviously fallen out of the wild card spot, and then they were looking at, oh, shoot, we're about to lose 2 out of 3. We're about to lose 2 games in 24 hours to the Marlins, of all teams, in 2 very low-scoring affairs, and then about 15 minutes worth of baseball in the bottom of the 8th inning changed all that. They're just fine now, right? Just fine.
I mean, they sure turned things around offensively, because if you look, first of all, Andy said must sweep, and they didn't come through for you on that.
No.
But they did win the series, which is nice enough. But if you track it from yesterday, they scored their lone run in that game in the first inning. They didn't score another run until that little period of time in the 8th inning that you were referencing, where they put up a 5 spot today. So a pretty long stretch of
16
nothing in
scoreless innings
in the series.
In between. Yeah, not great.
So the fact that they're able to, you know what, they made the runs count this afternoon, they get their win, they get their series win, I think you can exhale a little bit, but that would have been a bad series to lose, especially on the heels of a recent skid where they had dropped out of a wild card spot and you felt pretty comfortable, but then maybe not so much. And we're asking these big picture questions suddenly about this Royals team, where for a while at the beginning of the year, it was, can this team really do it long term for 6 months? And we had our questions about that. But then the longer they were in that mix, the more we thought, maybe they're just going to be around. But this recent stretch was the one where it's like, okay, now those thoughts are creeping back into our minds about what is this Royals team really, and that conversation, maybe it gets ramped up anyway, Andy, because you can't change the way you played in this series, but at least you can put it off for a little bit longer. Like, hey, you beat the Marlins 2 out of 3. At least that job was accomplished. But I do think questions about the offense, which to me were always going to be the case with this team, those persist. And look, you had Seth Lugo pitch really well for you yesterday. Brady Singer pitched really well for you today. You almost blow both of those games, and in the end, you only lose one of them. But it's not the pitcher's fault, right? It would have been the offense if they'd have lost this series. There would have been nowhere else to put the blame.
No, it's very clearly what's putting them behind in some of these games, and you can't just hang your hat on the fact that, oh, you only held the Marlins to 2 runs yesterday. No, it's not that impressive. Like, you pitched well, great, but you're expected to get a pretty good foundation with what your rotation has given you this year. There are still bullpen questions, but the offense is what could have changed their luck, not just the last couple of days, but during the weekend when they were facing Texas and they only had 5 hits and no runs through 2 complete games. Like, you can't operate that way. You got to find more thump in the lineup some way, somehow. So, I mean, the fact that, again, today it was Bobby Witt Jr., who with 2 outs and nobody on in the bottom of the 8th inning, and they're down a run, and he gets a triple, and then it just, snowballs from there. They're able to get timely hit after timely hit and keep the line moving. But, the fact that they got that is another buoying sort of performance for what it could have been, which could have been a little more disastrous than everyone's now talking about after the 5-run 8th. So, I mean, it's a jolt in the arm, but how is it going to be sustained? That's been the question for the Royals all season long, and I think it even more so now when you're in the dog days of summer.
Yeah, and I mean, the Royals in that 8th inning, I think they had 6 of their 10 hits from the game in that one inning, also reached via walk. They had it all going on, but that was a complete night and day differential compared to the version of that offense that we had seen the prior 16 or 17 innings or whatever it breaks down to have been. I just look at this team and find that they're in that middle right now where this front office has to make a decision about how much it really wants it this year. Like, how much is this year going to be a priority? Because in my opinion, based on the amount of baseball we've seen almost halfway through the year, I'm not sure, as constructed, that the Royals are going to hold up. I don't think they're a bad team. I think they're deficient in a couple of areas, and offense would be the obvious place to add. And if they don't do that, Andy, I look at this Royals team. I know they're above 500 right now, but I think they finish right around 500. Give me like 79 to 82 wins if they don't really make a splash at the deadline. I think they eventually, the signs we have seen from this offense recently is a little bit more indicative of what they might have 1 through 9 than the crazy runners in scoring position threat that they were through the early portion of the season. So I look at them now and go, how much do they really want this in 24 versus, hey, this was nice. We didn't lose 100 games. We're going to be in that middle, and we played respectably, but we're okay with that because we have a long-term plan in place. I honestly think, when you think about the guys they've signed, guys like Lugo that have helped carry them, guys like Brady Singer that you've got to make decisions on in terms of long-term viability and if he's going to be re-signed, Michael Wacha, different guys. I feel like they've signed a group of ready-made to contend now types of pitchers that are doing that for them, so it would be a shame to waste it. It would be a shame not to try and pursue their deficiencies at this deadline, in my humble opinion. Go get a bat or two and see what you can't shake up.
Because you're getting the high watermark of a lot of these guys' careers at this point. You just can't bank on it every time. So I do agree with you that, if you're in position to be one of the 6 teams in the American League that gets to fight it out for a pennant and then eventually a World Series, you go for it, because it does not matter what spot in the bracket you are on. I think there are obviously levels to it, but you can get hot in that period of time and has just as much of a chance as the top seed. And it's just something that teams have to recognize now. And I think most teams have. We see more teams trying to add and fight for those positions. I think the Royals still need to be in that group, which brings us to the conversation of, okay, so we know they need help in the outfield, but I think that it's also very clear that they need help in the bullpen too. And if you have to go after one of them, maybe you know that you have to add something to your team, but maybe you don't know if you have all the resources at your disposal to splurge in 2 different areas.
Right.
Where are they going to go? And apparently Ken Rosenthal, the Athletic, reported that Kansas City is currently prioritizing relief help over its search for additional outfield talent. Because I do think we have to recognize that, yes, that the hitting has not been there, but there have also been some deterioration of guys that they thought would be a little more reliable in the bullpen, and it hasn't necessarily panned out. One of them, unfortunately, former Cardinal Chris Stratton, who has not been all that great this year. Will Smith has also, the lefty specialist, has been up and down. James MacArthur, their back-end guy, I guess closer most of the time, hot and cold. You want to try and maybe find another leverage reliever. And so that I wonder how that kind of looks as far as pursuing both areas where you've got limited resources, but you're still trying to, again, go for it, because I think they absolutely need to be in that camp.
Yeah, and you know what? It makes sense that they're looking for relief help, because when you think about where they were coming into the year, okay, they're a team that just lost 106 games. For as much as, you want to have the best bullpen that you can, back-end relief help, probably not the biggest priority for a team coming off a 100-loss season, because as much as it's a nice story that they are in the mix now, if we were being honest back in February and March, we weren't necessarily tabbing this Royals team to be a contender right away. And contending teams need to beef up their bullpen. So they're coming from a place of, they kind of built it from scraps and pieced it together. But now that they're in the mix, and the deficit of relief pitching could actually be the thing that costs them the postseason, now that they're so close that they can feel that, they can taste that, I think that makes sense as an area to target. And right now this season, the Royals relievers rank 21st in MLB with a 4.32 reliever ERA this year. So that's not even top half, it's bottom third, and you don't feel good about that if you're a team with an above 500 record genuinely trying to make a go of it. And so I get that. I also think relief pitching easier to come by at the deadline than a difference-making outfielder, because there are guys on short-term contracts that, if you're a team that's not contending in 24 and you've got an expiring relief asset, to me would make all the sense in the world to go ahead and get anything you can for that guy because relievers are so fickle, the turnover is so high. Go put that guy somewhere where he can actually make a difference if he's expiring on his contract anyway. I just look at this lineup and go, all right, guys that you were hoping to maybe get a little more thump out of. Michael Garcia, he's got a 625 OPS. Salvi has kind of come back down to earth a little bit, but still having a really nice season. Melendez is a 609 OPS. Hunter Renfroe's around 650. It had a nice game today, but like they just up and down this lineup, it's kind of the same problem the Cardinals have. And Andy, I guess I recognize that teams across baseball are sort of dealing with this when you have some injuries and when you have some guys that don't perform to expectation. Sometimes half your lineup looks like a pretty subpar group. And that's like you could look at the Braves. The Cardinals are playing them right now, and the Braves' bottom of the order is not always very robust. But I just think there's too many of that in the Royals lineup to where I'd love to find a way for them to do a little bit of both. You get a reliever, but maybe get one outfielder that, again, doesn't have to be a major difference maker on paper, but you can see the signs of maybe him having I still point back to a Dylan Carlson, where I think if the Cardinals get healthy in their outfield, it might make sense to send him somewhere where he can just get some run. I don't know if the Royals have even thought about that and vice versa, but that's the example where I'm talking about like a guy who's maybe just needing a change of scenery. That could be a worthy pursuit for a Royals team that wants to spend most of its resources on relief pitching. I think that would be a way you could divvy it up and maybe be able to do a little bit of both.
It's interesting. 875-KTGR if you want to call or text us. I think when you're talking about the outfield camp a little bit more, you want to make sure that it's somebody that's not a rental, I think. I think you're maybe pursuing somebody that you can control maybe past this year.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, so, I mean, Carlson would fit that.
He would.
You don't know how much you could get out of him based, again, on the offensive numbers and the fact that if you're making a deal at the deadline and you're trying to bring more boost to the lineup, is Dylan Carlson going to be the answer? Don't know. It could
Maybe
be,
not.
but you just you try him out and see what it looks like. So, I mean, that's an interesting angle, but it doesn't really seem that there would be all that much available to them as far as outfielders beyond this year. You might have to go with a rental at this point.
And that's okay, too. And the rentals will come cheaper, right? Because you're not talking about acquiring guys that have lots of team control attached, and usually that means more prospect capital that it'll take to get those guys, especially if they're high-performing players. But the other side of this is, all right, if you also want relief pitching help, what are you actually giving up to get the outfielder? Because a lot of times, maybe you're giving up some pitching. And I just don't know if that's going to be something that lines up with the Royals' goals. You could still point to maybe their depth of the organizational starting pitching and say, hey, maybe we could give a number 7 starter, whoever that might end up being. We've talked about Daniel Lynch at different points throughout this year, but somebody like that who's maybe a little bit extra compared to what they have in their rotation now. They feel good about their starters, and maybe you could come up with something you don't have as much of. And that's interesting because you're trying to do multiple things at once. And look, this is kind of fun to be a Royals fan and see that this team is in a spot where it's not obvious that they're going to be selling. It's not very clear exactly the way to approach it, but like they're going to be players in this thing, I think, and they're going to be in the mix on making some moves to try to improve the team. And that's fun because the Royals just haven't been in that position in a while, and certainly first time under Piccolo's reign that they've really been able to look at it this way rather than just, all right, sell off Aroldis Chapman, sell off all the short-term pieces because it ain't happening this year. No, they do have a different mindset, and I think rightfully so.
875-KTGR, what mindset do you want the Royals to have during this trade period as they get a win today that was not looking like it was going to be a win at around this exact time an hour ago, but it ended up being the case. 2-out magic in the 8th inning, no less. Bobby Witt Jr. starting it off with the triple, and then Pasquantino after him, singling him in, and Salvi doubling to bring in Pasquantino and get in the go-ahead run, and then adding on from there. It's just the kind of Royals that we're used to seeing, but again, I don't know if that type of Royals gets you through all of July, all of August, and puts you in a spot for either a wild card or even chasing down the Guardians, which is becoming a tough task right now because the Guardians came into today with the best record in baseball.
Yeah, what happened to them?
I mean, just
what's going on there?
All of a sudden, turning up the heat. And they come to Kaufman for 4 games this weekend, so that could be key. Yeah, 7 straight wins.
That could be key in ending the hopes completely, though, if the Guardians keep playing like they're playing.
Yeah, which is why I thought it was important to get a sweep this week for the again,
I hear you.
Marlins. You come into your place.
I get it.
Wins have been hard to come by against teams that you should be getting more wins against. You should have gotten more wins against the A's than you did. Should have gotten more wins against the Rangers that you did. And so you need to make up some of that. And this was the opportunity to do it. Couldn't get it done last night. Again, they had a 1-0 lead for the longest time, but then the Marlins finally broke through themselves late, and the Royals couldn't give themselves enough cover. So, I mean, again, as it's constituted right now, this team probably can't hold up for 162. But I think they should be in the boat of, okay, either outfield or bullpen. Let's find ways that we can prioritize getting some value players that can help us now so that we can go for this thing.
Yeah, because an example of how it can go sometimes is think about the Marlins last year, where the Marlins made the playoffs, probably weren't expected to do it. And granted, once they got there, they didn't really do a ton. But you got in the race. A team like the D-backs also got in the race and was not expected to do a ton, and they made the World Series. Yep. Now you look at it a year later, the Diamondbacks are scrapping a little bit below 500, trying to find another way in as a wild card. But the Marlins have completely, torn this thing down to where they're recognizing they're still maybe a couple years away from the next iteration of that team being able to compete. They had to go back to the drawing board. My point with the Royals is not to say the same thing is going to happen to them, and I don't think that it will, but you can just never take for granted being in the mix and having a shot at doing a thing. And heck, I mean, you're trying to build a stadium, you're trying to get all of this support. Having a team that's showing, hey, we're going toe-to-toe, wire-to-wire, trying to make it this year, I think would be valuable to a fan base that, honestly, to me, feels like it's just looking for a reason to buy in. But the Royals have to give them that, Andy, and I think going for it at the deadline and trying to, look, you may not always get it right in terms of improving the team, but making the effort to try and improve that team, I think, is what it's going to take. And I believe Piccolo and company are going to be willing to do that. It's just going to be a question of what form that actually takes.
Yeah, and you have to be smart about it. You got to pick the right player, especially when it comes to the outfield. I mean, there's some big contracts out there, but also some guys under team control that may or may not be available, but a lot of them are controlled by teams that I think right now are still in the race. And it's hard to tell right now, but if a team like Arizona, like you mentioned, if they drop out at some point, then does some of their players come available? It's just we're about a few weeks away from knowing who exactly might be in that seller group, and so you just have to make sure that you're keeping the pulse on it at all times so that you can jump at the right chance and maybe come in with the best offer for somebody.
Yeah, this is that period of time where you have to be water. You have to be fluid and flexible as a front office, because any team goes on a 7-game winning streak or conversely a 7-game losing streak, suddenly that team is not the viable trade partner you thought they might be, or maybe they lose their way into becoming a viable trade partner. So what happens at the end of June is going to inform what happens mid-July and toward the deadline, but it's not going to be the entire picture. So yeah, you have to be fluid in these spots and recognize that it may take making a list of a number of guys like, hey, it might be interesting. Time might not be right just yet, but if this team takes a dive, we might swoop in. We might try and attach ourselves to this player or that player. Those are the types of things that I think the Royals front office and the Cardinals, for that matter, are doing right around now.